Etapu, Assalamu alaikum, Namaste, Haru Nefer. This is Qesankh Keparu with another exciting video for you. And in this video, we're going to deal with the issue of Akhenaten's great mistake. But before I do that, I want you to hit the like button on this video. If this is your first time to my channel, hit the subscribe button to get notifications on when I go live and when I upload recorded videos. Also, if you want to know more about my spiritual teachings, you can scroll down below, click on the ebook links, download the ebooks. They are free. Download them right away, and you can start reading a little bit more on my spiritual teachings. However, if you want to follow that rabbit down the rabbit hole, you can become a Patreon supporter for as little as $1, $5, or $20 per month. You'll get exclusive access to instructional videos that teach you how to communicate with ancestors, how to communicate with the gods, how to invoke spirits for your protection, how to do a money ritual, how to do self-hypnosis to get rid of things like overeating and bad habits. And if you are an Asera level supporter, you'll get all your oracle readings for free. So become a Patreon supporter today. Remember, again, you can cancel at any time. There is no obligation. And last but not least, share this video with family and friends so we can get this revolution started. Haru Nefer, Grand Rising, may Buddha bless you. I want to talk a little bit about this subject matter because I've covered it before in the past, but I don't think people are really getting it and understanding the totality of it. And that's a key word, totality. For those of you who are not familiar with Pharaoh Akhenaten, he was the 10th ruler of the 18th dynasty in ancient Egypt, or Kemet. His wife is Nefertiti, and you've probably seen the bust of Nefertiti. And so one of the things that he is famous for is what they call is bringing into existence the concept or the idea of monotheism, which is there is just one God. Prior to that, Egyptologists and historians tell us that Egypt was a polytheistic culture, civilization, meaning they worshiped many different gods and goddesses. Now, I take issue with that, but let me go into more of the historical significance of Akhenaten, all right? And he is named after the sun god Aten. So let me just share my screen for those of you who are not familiar with Akhenaten. This is what he looked like, and there is a lot of controversy over him. You see, when he came into power in the 18th dynasty, he put in place the worship of Aten, the one god. And he did what they called was the Exodus, where he took his followers and they left Kemet to go into a separate region and area of their own to worship Aten. And he decreed that the Egyptians or the Kemetic people or the Kamau could not worship any other gods but Aten. And he was the intermediary, sounds familiar, to get to Aten. So if you wanted to talk to Aten, you would have to talk to either him or Nefertiti, and they would relay the message and come back to you. Now, this is opposed to the way Kemet formerly operated, where it was many different deities. Well, what Aten was successful in doing was creating a type of mini rebellion, because in the end, the Kemetic people rebelled against this idea. And him and Nefertiti were never heard from again. We don't know exactly what happened to Akhenaten, but we do know that in putting in place his newfound religion, which was based on peace, pacifism, that he almost opened Kemet to military conquests by foreign invaders, because he demilitarized Kemet. and in doing so left them open to invasion because of his focus on peace. And he wrote many great hymns to Aten to celebrate this deity, all the while causing uproar within Kemet. Now, he is said to be the origin of the biblical Moses, that it was actually, Moses was actually Akhenaten, because he did the Exodus. He believed in the one God. But that's neither here nor there. What is important for us to understand is this concept of monotheism versus polytheism. And I believe to a great degree, the mistake has been made by Egyptologists and historians because they are ill-equipped and incapable of understanding the Metuneta. They are incapable of understanding. They are incapable of understanding our history. And this is validated. This is fact. Seker Nefer Tyra asked a very, very good question. And we do believe that his wife, Nefertiti, was of foreign origin, coming out of the Eurasian culture, which did worship one God. So her marrying marrying Amenhotep or Akhenaten had a great influence on him to convert to so-called monotheism, to accept this foreign concept. Great question. Thank you so much. Because this belief, as I am going to illustrate, and you're not going to hear this from any other platform, was instrumental in a way of thinking that is native to Europeans. To understand this idea of monotheism versus polytheism, you first have to understand the European mind, which is based in left brain thinking, which is also based in linear thought process. Whereas the African mind is based in non-linear thought process. Whereas the European mind is segregative in nature. Whereas the African mind is synthesis, congregative in nature. Now, why is this so important? It is important to understand that the ancient people of Kemet were Africans. And in being Africans, they were right brain thinkers or integrated brain thinkers, whole brain thinkers. They thought with the left and the right hemisphere of the brain. This caused them to create a world based on cosmologics, where there was an ecosystem and there was Ma'at, which is the whole, looking at the whole, looking at things as interdependent and interrelated. Understand now, that's the important key now. The African mind thought in terms of Ma'at, holistic thinking, left and right hemisphere of the brain. So when we fashioned our deities, we looked at how they were interrelated and interdependent upon one another. To remove one was to collapse the whole of the ecosystem. And that's what Akhenaten did. He collapsed the whole of cosmologics thinking, higher level thinking. You see, the ancient Kemet people were working on a foundation of a unified field theory of understanding everything in the universe that exists is highly dependent on each other. Do you understand? And you cannot isolate something, study it, compartmentalize it, and not understand its relation to other things. And that's the European mindset. It seeks to compartmentalize things, study it, and see how there is no relation to anything else. Black people, there's no relation between black people and white people. Black people are inferior, white people are superior. There's no relationship between a mental diet and what's being shown on television and what's being played in music. Athletes that train themselves for physical excellence is in no difference than why we must train the brain to work properly by giving it certain vitamins, minerals, and ideas and concepts to take in. And the very notion of segregative thinking corrupts the brain of African people. And that's what was happening in Kemet. Akhenaten took the idea of a left-brain people, there is only one God, try to fit that into the box of a right-brain people and expected them to adapt to that. If you don't understand that every deity relies upon the other, has an interrelationship and dependence between the other, then you're missing the idea of the universe. If we look at Ma'at, which is the law, you must also have Tehuti, which is a measure of the law. Ma'at is the law. Tehuti tells you how to administer the law. You cannot have one without the other. And then we bring in Harukahuti because the law means nothing if you don't have the means to enforce it. He is the enforcer of justice. Ma'at is complemented by Sebek. So Ma'at is whole brain thinking, right brain, and Sebek is left brain segregative thinking. They are not contradictory, but complementary. And if you remove Sebek, you get a skewed view of the world. You won't understand Ma'at properly. If you remove Ma'at and just solely depend on Sebek, which is the world we have today, then you will never understand truth, because truth is about the interdependence and interrelationship of things. It is not good to kill, but if you weigh it against something, such as killing in defense of one's own self, then it's righteous. But what this world has done is to remove Ma'at, to predicate everything that we study and do, especially in the universities, on Sebek, which is solely segregative thinking, seeing how things are separate from one another and not related. Therefore, this society is not built upon an ecosystem, or is not built upon cosmologics, seeing how every piece sustains the whole, seeing a universal field theory of everything. So the people of Kemet spent thousands of years to develop the Port Neteru, the company of gods, the cosmological tree of life that would explain the interdependence and interrelationship between everything They spent thousands of years to perfect that, only to have Akhenaten come along and trash that and say, no, we're not going to study cosmologics. We're not going to try and understand the universe as it relates to you and everything in it. We just want to understand this one deity, Aten. And this is why it caused so much chaos and confusion in Kemet at the time. His mistake was trying to fit linear left brain thinking into a culture and civilization that spanned thousands of years of thinking right and left brain, integrated brain thinking. When these nincompoops go to church on Sunday, they are studying linear left brain segregative thought process. Their thinking has become corrupt. What that minister in the pulpit is disseminating to the people is a corruption of God's law, ma'at. You must look at the whole, the totality of everything and how it's interdependent, interrelated. This is why the walls in ancient Kemet know thyself. And in knowing thyself, you understand the universe. Carl Sagan, all of these astrophysics will say it and agree upon it, that we are made of the stuff of the universe. So why aren't they instituting in the university cosmological thinking? Because they can't think in those terms. They are left brain thinkers trying to teach us who have had a history on this planet of millions of years. Note, I said millions. But let me take this further, my beloved, by going to the good book, the Metuneta. On page 65, Ra'u Nefer Amen explains this in wonderful detail. Page 65, third paragraph down. Now we can fully take up the question of monotheism versus polytheism. For the longest time, Westerners have held, number one, that monotheism, the belief that there is only one God, is superior to polytheism, the belief in more than one God. That monotheism first appeared in the world with the Hebrews, and that monotheism represents a higher evolutionary understanding of divine reality than polytheism. Ain't that a damn shame? Not only did they try to force us to think in a very linear and segregated way, they use the idea of them thinking left brain monotheistic to say that they're superior to us because they thought we were polytheistic. And he's going to talk about why we weren't polytheistic. The latter was explicitly or implicitly cited as evidence for the supported low level of evolutionary attainment of blacks. If you read between the lines, you will see that all the historical, anthropological, and other literature is referred to as modern, progressive, evolved, and corresponded to Western culture expressions. They always do that in their history books. And what is referred to as primitive, unevolved, etc., corresponds to non-Western cultural expressions. First of all, the above shows clearly that the religion of blacks cannot be classified as polytheistic nor monotheistic, as these terms are commonly misunderstood. From the earliest appearance of Western man on the historical scene, 2500 BC, until the end of the 19th century AD, his thinking and perception of reality, for the most part, can be described as linear. That is to say that all manifestations are the result of single things acting upon single things. As Western science took a turn for the better toward the end of the 19th century AD, it began to become more and more apparent that all manifestations in the world were the expression of multiple things coordinating their functions. This new insight received the names of Gestalt theory, meaning the whole, theory of the whole. Field theory, Gestalt theory, field theory, systems theory, and dethroned the belief and expectation of finding anything that was not composed of a multiplicity of co-acting components. It ushered in the host of fantastic scientific technologies that make up today's world: computers, rockets, bioengineering. A study of all these new systems theories will show that there are a pale version of the systems theory cosmology developed by non-Westerners in antiquity and contemporary Africa. The question is begging, why did it take Westerners so long, at least 6,000 years behind Blacks, to arrive at this realization? This realization that the world the universe is operated based on cosmologics, or a unified field theory, or the individual components working together to form the whole. In previous chapters, we detailed the facts concerning Western man's polarization in left brain hemisphere thinking. Now this part of the brain is only capable of linking sequentially following units. It's incapable of systems thinking. That is a task that belongs to the right side of the brain with its unlimited integrative capability. Western people would look, for example, at 7 integrated sets of one-to-one relationships and see 7 separate sets of one-to-one relationships. On the other hand, Blacks and Orientals will see 1 set of 7 integrated subsets of one-to-one relationships. Polarized in the segregative part of the brain, Westerners could not integrate the host of deities of the Black pantheon. They just couldn't see how the many were integral parts of the one. This stuff about co-acting multiple factors shaping and determining each and every physical entity was way beyond them. Yes, it was way beyond them. So they described our religious practice as polytheistic. We must reject it for obvious reasons. And since the term monotheism fails to convey the reality that the one God functions, lives through a plurality of integral parts, it too must be rejected. In this book, I will use my coinages, synthesis and synotheism. Both syn and cis are variants of the same prefix carrying the basic meaning of the word, basic meaning of whole compounded of several parts. Cis, S-Y-S, is the root of system, and syn, S-Y-N, that of synthesis, both analogous terms. It was said that the 9 emanations directed the behavior of physical things. In the case of humans, this depends on our living in harmony with the laws governing the functions of the deities. This is due to man's freedom of will to determine the quality of his destiny. Other creatures not possessing this faculty of free will are obligated to follow. In future chapters, we will see how non-Westerners in the following the laws of these emanations operating within their being achieve personal and social harmony by living a unitarian or systematic life, while Westerners, in spite of the claim that they believe in one God, live polytheistically, that is, a way of life in which the various personal and social interests are not integrated, universal in lip service, plural version, and living. It must be understood that the greatest evil in life, as understood by Blacks, was the lack of integration into thinking, lack of integration between beliefs, feelings, and actions between the various social interests. Integration in these areas was achieved through their cosmology and in application to daily living and spiritual practices. Our religion had to be integral with integratable with science, government, economics, medicine, education, and even human institutions. It had to integrate all areas of our lives. the idea of Unitarianism, extremely important and highly elevated in our culture, was reinterpreted by Westerners, European and Semitics, when they adopted our culture according to their thingish way of thinking. By thingish, thinking is meant that the reduction of abstract realities to sense perceptions, while one denotes singularity, one apple, one book. Unity denotes the abstract tie between a plurality of things. Thus, the belief in and living as the Unitarian God was reduced to the belief in the one God and the disintegrative way of living. Once more, we must see that this thingish or materialistic way of thinking belongs to the left side of the brain. Rational thinking, which is needed to understand understand the black understanding of God and religion, is the property of the right side of the brain. So this was the basis of them in their idea of evolution to write books and publish papers on us as lower level beings. And it legitimized slavery. It legitimized white supremacy and oppression because their thinking is so left brain. They're polarized in that. So they can't think in terms of systems thinking, can't think in terms of how everything forms the whole. Everything has a purpose. And if you remove one thing, the whole collapses. They're incapable of understanding that. So what Akhenaten did was to try and bring in this type of thinking, linear, segregated thinking, into a holistic way of living. And that did not work for the people of Kemet. The problem when you read the historical books about Akhenaten or Amenhotep VI is that they try to make it seem that these deities that the Egyptians were worshiping were just separate, isolated deities that could be discarded without ramifications. If I lobotomize you or conduct surgery and remove your left brain, I now have damaged you. By trying to get the Kemetic people to worship just Aten alone, without the understanding that Aten is one deity among a pantheon of deities that comprise the universe and explain all things. This is the fault that we now see before us of Western man and woman. Their thinking is corrupt, skewed, and off. And they are the ones in positions of power to legitimize this thinking, even though it's incorrect. And even modern psychologists know it. The problem is that we don't have institutions to propagate and counter their outdated, incorrect paradigms that is now hurting the world. And in 325 AD, the Roman Emperor Constantine reversed what the ancient Egyptians did. The ancient Egyptians formed a coup d'etat against Akhenaten, and the Roman Emperor Constantine put back left brain thinking and instituted on a global level, which is why we are now living in darkness, which is why we cannot figure out how the Egyptians built the pyramids, which is why whenever we study the ancient cultures of antiquity, we find that they were more advanced than we realize because they were whole brain thinkers. So what Akhenaten did was a great injustice. Unfortunately, his work has been carried on. And we're living in that day and age now of polarization and left brain thinking. And it is up to you and people like you, my beloved, to change that, to go into church and explain what they're doing is wrong. And how this belief in this so-called one God, the male attribute, is a fallacy, is a corruption of the truth. And it inevitably will bring down society if we continue on this path. Because we're not looking at the world in a holistic perspective. This is why ancient African people saw God outside and within. This is why ancient African people were able to adapt the Virgin Mary into their African traditional religion. They saw no contradiction. This is why the ancient African people welcomed white people, because they saw no contradiction. But since the left brain thinks in terms of linear hierarchy, when this Western man saw us, he could not help but categorize us on the linear totem pole. And said, we are superior, they are beneath us, and inferior. He was not able to think in terms of systems thinking. He could not see that these deities were working to support one another and to support the whole. Ra, his daughter, Ma'at, in the story of ancient Egypt, is important for the relationship to each other. You remove Ma'at, then you don't understand Ra, the father of the gods. You remove Tahuti, and you don't understand Ma'at. You remove Heteru, and you cannot understand Sekert. Do you understand now that the way the universities are teaching with separate subjects, separate disciplines that do not interrelate with each other is wrong? And when you have things like the bell curve that try to measure Black people's intelligence, and it shows that we have trouble in the modern educational system, of course we do. Because you're asking a right brain people to conform to linear left brain thinking. And that is not easy for us. That is not easy for us. So Akhenaten made a great mistake in what he was doing. And the historians did not understand the degree of his mistake. They only look at it as the observance of separate deities, which have no meaning in relation to the whole. And instead of looking at it from a right brain perspective, which they would have seen that the civilization was based on cosmological thinking. And if they had gone deeper and deeper, they would have seen how this abstract cosmological thinking was ubiquitous. But their mission was not to try and seek out the truth, but was to validate a lie, that lie predicated on we're inferior. If you get an opportunity, please donate to the channel. It would be appreciated. If you're just coming in, please hit the like button. So whereas we see the young people not doing well in these Eurocentric schools, we must understand that it is not being taught correctly for them to absorb the information. And I had a terrible time with that. First and foremost, the idea of the teacher standing in front of the class, verbally disseminating information, is not the African way of teaching. That's the linear Greco-Roman way of teaching. African people never taught by that. And the African mind was more apt to abstract thinking, and the European mind was more apt to concrete thinking, which is why when they thought about God, they had to have a reference. White man with beard sitting on a cloud in heaven. Whereas African people looked at God as Amen, that which is hidden, that which cannot be perceived, seen, heard, felt, touched, or taste. That abstract concept was too difficult for the European historians and Egyptologists to comprehend. This whole idea that God is within you and without you at the same time was something they couldn't fathom. Because we knew how to take things through synthesis and make them part of the whole. That was the great science. And speaking on that, the idea of the cosmologics and the pantheon of gods is a scientific approach, no different than when you go to school and learn the table of elements. It's the same thing. It's a scientific way of codifying how the universe operates. Ma'at is not just some woman. Sekert is not just some woman or man. It represents an attribute of the universe, of nature, and how it functions. And throughout the years, this has been forgotten. And they say, oh, you know, these Christians say, oh, we don't worship those pagan gods and goddesses. Well, they're not pagan gods and goddesses. They are principles of the universe and how it functions. Do you understand? But they can't. And they're teaching our people how to be linear left brain people, which is basically destroying their minds. Your goal, and what I have been teaching on this channel, is to become integrated brain thinkers, not left brain thinkers. I had been tirelessly trying to get away from that and to show you that the way to our salvation lies in integrated brain thinking. You see, a lot of these spiritual channels will talk about the meridians, kundalini, the chakras, and this will make you more spiritual. Well, how can you be more spiritual if your thinking is linear, left brain, concrete thinking? How can you be spiritual if your thinking is still along those lines? You cannot be. You cannot take linear thinking and just awaken a chakra or meridian and think that you'll be a better spiritual person. No, you'll just be an even more corrupt left brain linear thinker. We have to first get to the root of the problem. And for that, you must have right brain thinking, which seeks to find the root cause of the issue. And these so-called spiritual gurus are so stuck in left brain thinking. Well, if you do this meditation, it'll bring you money. If you do this meditation, it'll take you to this level of 5D. No, it won't. So how can we better understand cyclical time? You've got to work with frequencies. You've got to awaken integrated brain thinking. You'll never understand it thinking left brain. Ancient Kemet was predicated upon harmonics, frequencies, to awaken the correct thought process and to also heal people. When you get them to think right brain, which is essentially getting them to think whole brain thinking, you are healing people. That's healing them. Because we are sick at this present moment. We are sick, and we'll never understand history. We'll never understand why there's a high crime rate. We'll never understand these things thinking from a left brain perspective. What is the saying? You cannot come up with a solution using the same mindset that created the problem to fix the problem. Do you understand that? Awesome. I want to thank you all for tuning in. As a reminder, we're still looking for people to donate and invest in our movie Companion. Please scroll down and click on the link to donate or invest in the film. Also, too, as well, Saturday we have the filmmakers and actors networking dinner. That is going to be awesome. If you're in Las Vegas, register for that, sign up for it, come. It's free. You get free dinner, you get music, and we have awards. Okay. And then next year we're going to do a comedic retreat with its vegetarian food, meditations, and a lot of good stuff. So we're working towards that. I wanted to kick the filmmaking thing off first before moving to the meditations and all that, and the spiritual retreat. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. This is Qesankh Ma'a Keperu, son of Ma'at and Tahuti. Ma'at is the beautiful goddess Heteru. Until our next broadcast, Amen Ra.